Hello, this is Juliana Tu from Viva Escrow. Welcome to my continued series on fraud threats to the consumer. With this presentation, I would like to talk about one of the most public of all fraud threats, and that is identity fraud. Fraud is perpetuated by the fraudster, and this could be anyone, anywhere, committing this crime at any time. But first, let us review some basics. What is the main function of escrow? The escrow holder or the settlement agent or the stakeholder. We are the neutral, impartial third party with whom funds and documents are deposited and held in trust until all mutually agreed upon instructions have been met. What are our responsibilities? We handle the receipt in of funds to close, and we send out the proceeds of the sale. The funds coming in can be in the form of personal or cashier's checks, or they could be wires, or they could be financial instruments like a seller carryback note. The transfer of documents and data through our file can be done through either original paper documents or sending this paper electronically. When you go into escrow, the settlement agent takes responsibility for everything that is given to them. Not only the money, but the documents. Part of that is that they have to take responsibility for who is signing and the signatures on the documents. Now, let's talk about fraud. There are a few categories of fraud. Wire fraud is the most worrisome these last few years, and this was the first of the presentation in my series. Email fraud is the most prevalent. Those emails purportedly from someone you know asking you to open an attachment, don't do it unless you verify that that is the correct person. Check fraud is the most public, and personal identity fraud is the most harmful because this is someone pretending to be you and doing things in your name and possibly destroying your credibility. Now, what is identity fraud? Identity fraud is one person taking over another person's identity with or without that other person's knowledge to transact business and, of course, for illegal gain. What is the most common of these fraudsters? Of course, we know about crooks, people we don't know, and unfortunately, a lot of time they are relatives and people that are close to us that we know. Let me give you some examples of what can happen in a real estate transaction. Impersonation. In California, when a party is selling or purchasing a property without a spouse, California's community property laws require that the spouse give up whatever community property interest they may have. In this case, the seller brings in a woman to the escrow office as his spouse to sign a quitclaim deed. The couple do not have the same last names. Well, it used to be that the wives normally would take on the last name of the husband after marriage. But that is not a given anymore, especially among career baby boomer women. Many women keep their last name. And this is very true of foreigners. I would say that only 40% of the wives take the husband's last name. So do we look for a marriage certificate for proof? I don't know of any company that does so. Do we know that this is a spouse? We take the client's words for granted, right? So this woman in this sample signs the quitclaim deed, quitclaiming any interest that she may have in the property to the man. A couple years later, another woman calls regarding this particular transaction. To our surprise, she said she was the wife of the seller, and she had never signed a quitclaim deed. In the midst of her divorce from her husband, an inquiry into his assets brought forth this piece of property, which she, as the wife, had a community property interest in. So, if she was not the wife, then someone impersonated her to sign the deed. Thankfully, nothing developed from the original transaction with this poor ex-wife, but a very important lesson was learned. As settlement agents, we need to make sure that a person executing a document take responsibility for the content of that document, its veracity, and what is claimed. The document should state Jane Doe, a married woman and spouse of the grantee, hereby quitclaims to John Smith her interest in the property. Jane Doe would be making a declaration on the document as to her relationship to the other person, and the settlement agent would then be able to rely on its truthfulness. We had a case of a fraudster forging a deed, putting her brother's property into her name. Of course, she found a notary who would notarize this fraudulent deed. The property had equity, so she decided that it was time to cash out on the equity. The brother found out and forced the sister to deed the property back to his name. But this fraudster did not bother to tell the escrow officer that the property was no longer under her name. She continued the process of refinancing. Now, the title company in this transaction did a very big mistake by not checking that there was a deed recorded that returned the property to the original owner. The title company allowed the refinance to close under the fraudster's name. The fraudster took the money and left the country. The escrow officer ended up with a lawsuit between the lender, the title company, and the owner of the property. The fraudster got off scot-free. There is no justice in this world. Should we accept electronic signatures? This is what happens as technology advances and many platforms featuring the ease of electronic signatures are introduced. Now, everyone wants the ability to transact complex transactions on their phones. Viva Escrow struggled with accepting this new technology for years. It was a quandary. We could make it available for the convenience of our clients, but do we know who is on the computer clicking or signing away? It could be a son, a sister, even a neighbor who is helping the non-tech client. There was a case that went to lawsuit because of electronic signatures. An executed contingency removal form was signed by the buyer and deposited into escrow before the transaction closed. Months after the closing, the buyer raised unresolved property condition issues and sued the seller. In the lawsuit, the buyer denies ever executing the contingency's removal form. What? Well, it turned out that the contingency's removal form was signed electronically by the buyer's real estate agent, supposedly on instructions of the buyer. In electronic signatures, do we really know who is signing? A seller comes to our office to sign a deed in front of the settlement agent, who was going to do the notarization. The escrow officer looks at the picture ID, and she just can't match the picture to the person in front of her. Not only that, the client's attempt at signing the signature was not smooth and flourishing as you would expect. So the escrow officer refused to do the notary of the documents. Finally, the truth comes out. The person is not the seller, but the sister. The seller was out of the country, and the sister was given permission to sign all the paperwork for her. Really? The escrow officer asked this sister to send the whole package of escrow paperwork to her sister to be signed at the American consulate. How about the son who almost got away with selling his father's property from right under him? Our seller signed all the paperwork and even had the deed signed and notarized. But he was not the real owner. He was the son, and he had the exact same name as his father. The paperwork was signed and notarized outside of the escrow company, and the escrow officer did not meet the seller. But the escrow officer did get a copy of the driver's license, which the notary took. The driver's license showed the exact same name and address as the owner on the property. Apparently, the real owners were much older and might not have had all of his mental capabilities. It was by luck that a family member found out about the pending sale and alerted the settlement agent. It could have been a disaster. The notary public. When I first got into this industry, the clients all came into the office to sign their paperwork in my presence. I wore two hats, that of the settlement agent and the other of the notary public. That was almost 40 years ago, and things have changed. It is a 50-50 chance that the clients will actually come in and sit in front of us to sign their paperwork. Today, with mobile notaries signing our clients out in the field, these notaries have become the surrogate for the settlement agent. We rely on these notaries to ascertain two things. One, that the person signing in front of them are who they are supposed to be. And two, that the signers understand and acknowledge what they are signing. The second is just as important as the first. We have heard about elder abuse. And even when there is no such abuse, we have all heard about the difficulties of onset dementia or Alzheimer's. Let me talk a little bit about overseas clients, because handling those transactions can raise matters of concern. We rarely meet our clients. Most everything is done long distance. We rely on the real estate agent to be the go-between. Notarization of documents means it should be done at the American consulate, and we rely on them to do a good job of scrutinizing the ID of our client before doing the notarization. Don't allow your out-of-country client to utilize the remote online notarization platform that a few states offer for the expediency of the out-of-state or out-of-country client. They use a webcam to communicate with the client and to establish the identity of the client. There could be so many fraud concerns with this type of technology. And notarization platform that is being used right now is really not accepted if we find out that the documents were notarized that way. Even with a phone number and the email of a client, are we able to communicate with them and make sure that they understand and acknowledge the real estate transaction and the escrow process? What if we don't speak their language? How do we know that they understand and agree to the transaction? How do we know that the real estate agent is representing them appropriately? Wouldn't this be a ripe opportunity for identity fraud, something that a settlement agent can be caught up with years later? Each settlement company has to come up with its own management decisions and set up its own processes. It is something to be seriously considered. There are many other samples of real and really bad identity fraud cases. Title companies have many stories of fraudsters making fake driver's licenses. These fraudsters are known to target properties that are free and clear and which do not have an owner living on it. The fraudster either gets a loan on it and pockets the loan proceeds, or they sell it from under the real owner and pockets the sale proceeds. Attempts at these types of frauds are happening daily across the nation. Here are some tips for everyone, but particularly I am sending this to settlement agents who may be affected in their transactions. First of all, trust no one. Learn to say no. Follow your gut instincts. Don't be afraid to ask for help, and don't be rushed into anything. I would set up good office procedures and best practices and make sure that everyone in the office follows them. Communicate and contact your clients through the transaction. Make sure that they know that they are in a transaction. Educate yourself constantly. The fraudsters do, and you can do no less. Be sure you check out our identity fraud article at this link. It has more in-depth descriptions of the frauds that we have encountered or heard about. We have other articles on other types of fraud, and also other educational materials on this site. Thank you very much, and I hope that you have found this presentation helpful. Be sure to pass it on to others who may benefit. Remember, if you have questions, we have the answers. Thank you so much for watching, for listening, and for being aware of fraud.